it's 2.0.
I think, let me ask you this then. You're talking about the non-cup years as failures, right? Do the Avs 1.0 get any credit for the conference finals that they made and ultimately lost in, for the run of winning their division, what was it, 8-9 years in a row, I think? Do they get any credit for that, or is that just excess to what actually matters?
I think you get credit at the time from peers around the league. You know what I mean? Like realizing, like, holy crap, those guys are freaking there all the time, right? You got to remember Detroit, Dallas. We all knew we had to get through one another, right? And everybody made moves to make sure that you were going to face each other one way or another. You know what I mean? And then you were going to come out of the West. Probably in those 3-4 years you were winning, which history proves I'm right. But I think at the time, it's the word cup or bust, right? And I think there were failures. You look 20-some years later, and when you look at it like on a banner or something like that, you take my dad's Hall of Fame banner, if you really look at it, again, it's a team thing, but obviously he doesn't have a number, so it's different numbers are on it, right? And it's team achievements, and people look at it and they're like, holy shit, they've been to the conference finals that many times. So I think 20-some years later, you're like, holy crap, they were freaking good. You know what I mean? And they had success. But I mean, on the spot, I remember the whole, and again, I lived it just by, being in the dining room with my parents' house or whatever it is, or being on that team. And it's our goal here, and that was the message in the locker room, is we want to win the last game of the year. We don't really give a shit what happens during the year. We want to win the last game of the year. And when you do that, you're the last team standing. So I think that looking back, yeah, it's cup or bust, and it's a failure. Just like the Avalanche, the last two playoffs, it's like, God, especially this last one. I really felt that they don't have that weird afternoon of Game 5. I do believe they get through and they go to the finals. And like you say, Rudo, like, do they get through the Caps? I don't know. You know what I mean? But you'll never know, because it's never going to happen, because it's past due now. So, but if they get there against the Panthers, I do believe they would have come out of the West. And I felt they had the team for it to really like make some more damage than they did. And that's why I say it's a disappointment, and that's the attitude you want. And you got to remember, there's one guy that's part of both. His name's Joe Sakic, right? So part of one, you as a player and now as a manager, you got to have the same expectations, and I know for a fact Joe does. And when you're in it for the right reasons, Joe is in it for the right reasons. CMAC is in it for the right reasons. Obviously, the players and the core are in it for the right reasons. So I think there's more to come for the Avalanche 2.0 here coming up, in this next couple of years.
I want to piggyback a little bit off of what you said there, Eric, about the expectations for 1.0. If you look at the span of time that the Avs were in that cup contention window, the time that they won their division banners, they easily dominated their divisions every single time. The true threats during that time were either Dallas or Detroit. Their Pacific Division or Northwest Division foes were handily in the rearview mirror every time. Like 4 times they had 20-point leads on the division. So the expectation was, it was pretty much a definite, yes, it's cup or bust. We have no business not competing for the Stanley Cup if even within our own division, the rest of the competition is just a dot on the horizon.
Yeah, and part of that, to be honest with you and people listening, like, you got to remember that era. And I'm not going to say the National Hockey League was weak or is weak. You know that. And listen, the first place team can be beaten any given night by the 32nd place team. We all know that. In a 7-game series, a little different. But I'm talking about during the season. You got to remember in that era, the Canadian dollar was really low. Canadian teams were struggling a little bit. As you know, we had Edmonton, Calgary, Vancouver in the division. So I'm not going to say made it easier. I'm going to say that it wasn't as crazy as some of the past years there. For example, the Central Division of 3, 4, 5 years ago. You were talking about, holy crap, what a division that is. I'm not downplaying those teams. I'm saying that they were a little bit weaker because of the Canadian dollar and there was no salary cap, right? So they weren't able to spend that much money and get those the players that they wanted to get, and so that made it a little different. So somehow, I think we knew that, hey, at the end of the day, you got to get in the dance. In order to get in the dance, if you win the division, it's always easier. So they obviously, and I was part of some of those teams, and it was all part of it, always part of it. I remember 96, 97, all of a sudden we clinched the division, like you said. I think it's like freaking 7 months before the end of the season. Sarcasm, but all of a sudden we got in the locker room, there's some t-shirts there, and it's like, hey, division champs. And I was like, oh, that's freaking cool. You gotta remember, I come from LA where we sucked, and we were down at the bottom. And then I was like, oh, cool, I'm about to put it on. Like, this is kind of nice. And everybody's like, it's an afterthought. Like, what are you doing? Like, we're expected to do this. That's not what we're here for. And, and then you're like, oh yeah, true. You don't even like appreciate what you've done, because at the end of the day, you're looking that far ahead. But those are all steps to get through, and obviously the division was one of them that you had to get through and get to.
Let me ask you guys a question. Don't look it up off the top of your heads. No. Who won the President's Trophy in 2007?
Wasn't it Dallas?
It was not Dallas.
2007. Jeez.
Okay, you don't know. Who won the President's Trophy in 2015? Less than 10 years ago.
Let's say Chicago or LA.
Wrong.
Nashville.
Wrong. 2007 was Buffalo. 2015 was New York. My point being, nobody remembers who was good in the regular season. Nobody cares.
Right.
From that standpoint, as a team, there's no doubt that Era 1.0 has had more success than 2.0. Cannot argue with that. Now, I think when you get into individual player abilities, you count the regular season a little bit more, which we will get into in just a minute. First, we are brought to you by UC Health. They want you to live like there is a tomorrow here in Colorado. So make sure you go check them out. Make sure you're taking care of yourself with UC Health. You can go see a bunch of inspiring stories. That would be a lot better than expiring stories, to say the least, with UC Health. People like David Schlicht, a Colorado former Olympic hopeful. Unfortunately, a ski accident caused him to need his leg to be amputated, but David says he's come back stronger than ever. And of course, there are struggles along the way, but he now gets to show people what they can do even with a prosthetic leg. So if you want to learn more about David and other inspiring stories from UC Health, go to uchealth.org/tomorrow today to learn what it means to live like there is a tomorrow. And once you're taking care of yourself, make sure you're also taking care of yourself on the road with Toyota. You can visit one of your local Front Range Toyota dealerships today. They've got a vehicle for everyone. 17 different all-wheel or off-road vehicles, 16 different hybrid vehicles. They've got trucks like the Tundra. They've got SUVs like the RAV4. They've got sedans like a Prius or a Corolla. So whatever it is you're looking for, Toyota has the vehicle for you. They're the official vehicle of DNVR and the official vehicle of the Colorado Avalanche. You can find one at your local stores, including AutoNation Toyota Arapahoe and Centennial, Corwin Toyota in Boulder, Groove Toyota in Littleton, Mountain States Toyota in Denver, Stevenson Toyota East in Aurora, and Stevenson Toyota West in Lakewood. Again, get in the official vehicle of the Colorado Avalanche. Second period of the DNVR Avalanche podcast. The other thing that I cannot come up with any argument for Avs 2.0 over Avs 1.0 is the goaltending position. Patrick Roy, arguably, certainly in my opinion, the best goaltender of all time. Even his biggest hater has to have him top three. The Avs have not had a goalie that comes even within earshot of Roy.
It's not even close.
Yeah. So, no argument there. That is what it is. Go ahead, Eric.
No, I just wanted to add something that I totally agree with you. And again, you always, hear me say ingredients and recipes, and, obviously the Nordiques were, as you know, a bunch of ingredients and no recipe. And I'm not here to bash the people before. I mean, it's just a known fact. Like, they were always towards the bottom of the league, and they couldn't get out of it. And they had one decent year after the Lindros trade, and then they went back to mediocrity again and almost dead last the last year before Pierre took over. So if you look back, they had a bunch of ingredients, as you know, and then one of the key pieces that unanimously as a franchise, as the front office, starting with my dad, as you know, I mean, was really tight with Patty Waugh. Patty Waugh being his client all those years. They're molded from the same cloth. Those two, they're very similar in their own ways, and that was always his goal. Like it didn't matter. I'm gonna go get him. You know what I mean? And I'm gonna find a way to get him. As you know, it came close, as people didn't know, with the Nordiques, and I told you all about that. And then Serge Savard got fired, and the thing never happened. But and then you had Jocelyn Thibault, and one of my dad's clients. Believe it or not. And then and Stefan Facetta, awesome guy, awesome goalie. Both of them were great. But I think he felt that it's not about if those guys were good, is that Patrick was so special. You know what I mean? And Patrick was going to bring that winning attitude to the locker room, to the Foots, to the Sakics. And that's what they identified that first year being in Quebec there, falling short in the first round to the Rangers, right? And then, sometimes you're lucky. I tell you, to go win cups, you got to be lucky. To have a long career, you got to be lucky. I don't care what people say. Yes, it's hard work. Yes, it's all that good stuff. But there's a lot of luck involved. And that famous night in Montreal when Detroit got in town, and as much as we hate the Detroit Red Wings, we always go back to that was a freaking unbelievable event for the Avalanche, that night. You know what I mean? Yeah. And it's again, sure, I can tell you that, he was a great negotiator and a great, at the end of the day, something like that needed to happen to in order to get that. So you're right. And that solidified Avalanche 1.0, because without Patty Waugh, and I love Peter Forsberg, I love Joe Sakic. That's not what I'm saying. They are best of the best, But Patty was special in the sense of that, bringing that presence in the locker room. A little bit like Messier in 94, right? 91 to 94 to the Rangers. They finally did it in 94. So, Patty was that guy. He's that guy that wasn't afraid to address things that are not fun to be addressed. And I think just right there and then, it solidified, like you said, 1.0, where you still, to this day, haven't seen it with 2.0. And I don't think you're going to see it,
Yeah.
There was a sensational goaltending battle between him and Ed Belfour in the 96 second round. How many of those games went to overtime? 3 of them?
I think 3.
And multiple overtimes at that. If it's any other goaltender other than Patrick Waugh in the crease for the Avs at that time, they may not make it out of the second round. They were down 2-0 in that second round of the Blackhawks. So there's a very real possibility that first cup, if it was a goaltender other than Waugh, we may not have it in 96 at that time.
And you're right with Belfour there, because as a player, I remember going in there, whether it was Chicago and then Dallas, and it was loud. It was loud. And it was Eddie's better. Eddie's better. I mean, and it was there's some guys that crumble under that. There's some guys that thrive in it. I think Patty loved it. You know what I mean? And I think it's just like, I love this. You know what I mean? You think he's better? I'll show you. You know what I mean? So somewhere, somehow, as awesome as the fans were, chanting that, I think it just fueled them to be even better. You know what I mean? And that's what Patty Waugh was. But you're right. It was a big rivalry with Eddie Belfour for sure.
All right. Clearly, Patrick Waugh gives 1.0 the advantage in goal. But you keep moving through the lineup. And I think there are a lot of people that would give the 1.0 Avs the nod on the defensive side, but I think those people are being tricked a little bit. I'll put it to you that way. Because what everybody does when you talk about the defenses, you go, the 1.0 era had Ray Bourque, it had Rob Blake, and yes, they had Rob Blake, but he didn't join the team in 2001. So that was really the very tail end of the 1.0 era. Yes, they had Ray Bourque for 18 months. It was also the 40-year-old version of Ray Bourque, which is still really good, but it's not prime Ray Bourque, best defenseman in the league level Ray Bourque. So I think people say those names, and I don't want to take any credit away from them. They're both unbelievable players. They're both Hall of Famers, but they give them a little more credit than maybe they deserve in Colorado in that 1.0 era, I think. Now, of course, you have Adam Foote as well, was kind of the staple defenseman of that era for the guy who wore the Colorado jersey. But you look at the Avs defense now, too. You have Cale Makar, who's, in my opinion, the best defenseman I've ever watched. You have a Devon Taves, who's an elite top pairing guy. You get down the lineup, and, depending on how you feel about guys like a Josh Manson or a Sam Girard, you like them, or they're somewhere in the middle, or whatever you feel about them. I think the Avs' current defense is at least as good as the 1.0 Avs defense was on the whole. Because the Avs, for a lot of that time, again, it wasn't Blake, it wasn't Bourque. You had guys like John Clem. You had guys like Alexei Gusarov, who, again, good players, but not ultra mega Hall of Fame stars like people think of Blake and Bourque.
Right, you're not going to throw a name like Aaron Miller, with all due respect, and he was a very serviceable defenseman in his time, or Eric Messier when he was playing the defensive capability, or a Pascal Trepanier, who is also in that defensive mix for a time there too. They're not going to reach that same echelon as the current era guys, where you've got the Josh Manson, you've got Sam Girard, and of course you've got Cale Makar and Devon Taves, who are undisputed top defensive pair in the league.
For sure.
Yeah, I tend to second that too. I'm going to give the nod to the 2.0. I really like that defensive core. I really do. Now, going back to the 1.0, Aaron Miller, Trepp, those guys were awesome. Mess, that's a story in itself. Eric Messier was playing beer league hockey for a year and a half. That is unbelievable for people that think that, how do you make it to the NHL? That's like the most unconventional way to make it, is to quit and go play for your freaking grocery store, freaking at 11
the Kurt
o'clock
Warner of the NHL, yeah.
Oh, it's unbelievable. Unbelievable story. And what a great guy. Loves his Coors Light too, by the way. But to be honest, like if you go back, there was some good players. Friend of the show, Sly Lefebvre, awesome, great, and just solid Ds. Like you said, Gusarov was awesome. Curtis Lesishin was awesome. They were awesome in their ways, meaning, and Crow said it a couple days ago, right? Last week, he said, we went and got Sandis Ojelins. It kind of changed a little bit the dynamics back there because they didn't have that guy. Again, I'm omitting Footy because Footy has been a staple all the way through. Now, if you look at the 01 Cup team, I agree. A little bit of Montreal Canadiens influence there to my own man, which is what? The big three, right? Montreal Canadiens, Savard, Lapointe, and Larry Robinson. So, okay, how do we go? That was the theme. How do we go and get that cup? We have the goalie. We got the superstars, and how do we go on? That was big for them. It made them sacrifice Adam Denmarsh, as you guys know. So it was big for them to go get that big three, which was Footy once again, like in '96, and then Bourque and Blakey. And they felt that if they had that would compensate from the loss of Denmarsh. And even compensated for the loss of Peter, right, after the second round with that spleen thing. So that's all dominant that we're back there. So I have to say the 01 Cup team, I think, is the best D because of that. But I think as a era, I have to give it the 2.0. You know what I mean? Because I think it's the Manson and the Sammy G's, and they're just a little bit above some of those guys that were back then. Very serviceable, like you said. But those guys are obviously with Taves and Makar, just very, very solid. So I think as a group, it's the 2.0. As a season, I'll say it's the 2001 Cup team.
And 2.0, the defense powers everything. All the breakouts begin on defense. And that's what makes the forwards just that much stronger. They attack as 5, but it's all starting with the breakout on defense.
Yep. I think that's very true. I want to compare a couple of lineups for you guys here. Across the 3 Cup championship teams on defense, starting with 95-96, their defense in the playoffs, led by Adam Foote, then Alexei Gusarov, John Clem, Yui Krupp, Sylvain Lefebvre, Curtis Lesishin, Sandis Ojelins. Solid, but I don't think anyone's jumping out of their seat for that defense on the first Cup for the Colorado Avalanche. You guys already mentioned 01 and how powerful that is. Yeah, there's some firepower there. Rob Blake, Ray Bourque, Adam Foote at the top. Still Greg DeVries and John Clem, and then Brian Muir and Martin Skula to round out that playoff defense for 0-1. The top you feel pretty darn good about there. The bottom three, yeah, it's fine. I don't have any arguments. And then you look at the 2022 defense for the Avs' third cup. Obviously, Cale Makar at the top with Devon Taves on his pairing. Then you had Sam Girard, Bowen Byram, Eric Johnson, and Josh Manson. Jack Johnson, too, of course, as an extra defenseman there when Girard got hurt. I know that there's 2 Hall of Famers on that 0-1 defense. I'm certain that there's at least 1 Hall of Famer on the Avs' current defense. And I think the Avs' defensive depth today, or in 2022, was better. I think they're just a more well-rounded defense on the whole. How much of that is, well, we're playing in totally different eras where the way defense is played, as Matthew here mentioned. Sure. Back then, defense, you just take guys to the corner and take their lunch money. Nowadays, it's a lot more about getting pucks going the right direction. But I look at how they won these cups, too. And I think back to Game 6 against Tampa, where the Avs won their third cup. That third period was a defensive masterclass from this team, whereas their other championships, I think, relied a little bit more on Patrick Waugh to be that goalie as far as getting them across the line defensively compared to just how good defensively that 22 team was. So I'm glad you guys agree that 2.0 pretty darn strong on the defensive side of the puck.
And I don't want to underestimate either the 0-1, those 3 guys, I tell you, because if Bob was on the phone, like, again, we'll get Bob on again, but we can ask him that. But the job that DeVries, Clem, and Martin Skula did was outstanding. You know what I mean? And for journeyman defensemen, so to speak, you know, those guys were awesome. And as we know, they all ended up, forget about Scoey, and he was young, he was still here, but the other 2 ended up with pretty big contracts. You know, Devo with the Rangers and Clemmer with Chicago, and ended up with hefty pay raises because they did the job. You know what I mean? They were obviously on the bottom of the 6 and, you know, bottom 3 of the 6, not with the big 3. But boy, oh boy, they delivered. And, you know, there were some underrated guys there in those 3 guys.
Yep. I'm willing to give you that. I still think 2.0 better.
Agree.
I think so too. I mean, you look at 01 specifically, and you can, of course, draw some parallels between 01 and 22.
Sure.
Where there was that 01 team, hard to dispute how much of a juggernaut that was, but 2022 just took that and said, "Cool, hold my beer," and just went with it and ran roughshod over every opponent they had.
Yep.
The 01 team, let's not forget, went 7 against the LA Kings.
They did.
And they had a 3-1 series lead in that. And the Kings came back from the brink to force a Game 7.
It's true. The 22 team never had to do a Game 7. They took care of their business. There's a fair point for playoff success there.
Oh, that Game 7 against LA is the game of the playoffs, of the whole entire playoffs. Forget about Game 7 against Jersey. You don't win that game. You're not, you know, and they had lost total momentum of the series. I really thought, honestly, I went to the game that night. Obviously, I was on summer vacation. New York Rangers, we didn't make the playoffs that year. So, but I was back home with Jill, and I went to the game, and honestly, deep down in me, I really thought they were going to get shit kicked. I really, really thought they were. And I tell you, my buddy Rob Blake was struggling a little bit because it was he doesn't like controversy, and it was a tough exit from LA, right? And you know, obviously going to Colorado, and then he scores that big one-timer, and you could tell like he showed so much emotion after that game. I was like, all right, they're good. They're gonna get it done. And but I was shocked because I really thought they'd get shit kicked.
Well, it worked out. We'll put it that way.
It worked out, and it came at a cost.
Yeah, of course.
No Forsberg for the remainder of it, but you handled St. Louis fairly, I won't say with ease, but
relatively, yeah.
It was significantly easier than LA.
Yep.
Let's say.
Yep, for sure.
And then you go the distance against the defending champion.
it worked out in this timeline at the very least. We are brought to you by us. We have a ton of events this year. Obviously, the Avs events, 3 takeovers, starting with one against Washington in November. You can join us for our takeovers. Come have a great time with DNVR at Ball Arena. Watch an Avs game in person with us, any one of the 3 that we have. The other ones are against Montreal, Eric's favorite team, and Minnesota. So there should be some fun ones this year for takeovers. Of course, we have tons of other events here, too, for the rest of the Olympics. We're going to have watch parties. I know the Nuggets guys are huge on watching Serbia play on the basketball side of the Olympics. That's a ton of fun. The Rapids guys are doing tons of events with them, so come check that stuff out here. If you're a football fan, I know both CU and the Broncos are having travel takeovers for games at away stadiums. If you want to go on a little trip and enjoy yourself with DNVR, go check those things out. We do some pretty cool stuff here. If you like us, consider supporting us, either going to one of those events or maybe signing up to be a diehard today and get access to all of our exclusive content. Once you've supported us, make sure you're also having fun with your sporting events with Bet365. If you want to put some money down on pretty much any sport under the sun, you sign up with a new account and code DNVR365 at Bet365. You bet $5 on anything, and Bet365 will give you $150 in bonus bets. So jump on it with Bet365. Make sure you're getting in with that DNVR365 code. And once you've done that, you'll get the $150 in bonus bets. You'll have a great time. You'll win some money. Maybe you'll be up some money. And if you lose some money, it was bonus bets anyway. So no big deal with Bet365. Of course, when you do gamble with them, you must be 21 or older, physically located in Colorado. And if you or somebody you know has a gambling problem, call or text 1-800-GAMBLER today. Third period of the DNVR Avalanche podcast. This is where things start to get really interesting when you talk about the forward comparisons between these two teams. Set MacKinnon and Rantanen and Sakic and Forsberg to the side for a second, because I think those are clearly the superstars of the forward core for both groups. When you look at the rest of those forward cores, who do you think has the advantage?
Yeah. Man.
It's tough. It's tough.
Yeah. I mean, again, I think we said it earlier. I think comparing the 4 or 5 year eras, then it's like, yeah. And then if you compare teams, you know what I mean? Like cup years, I mean, there's no denying 2022 was outstanding. I mean, again, Kadri was on fire, Burakovsky. I mean, right? I mean, God. But yeah, Logan is saying something like I'm going to say right now, like, and I'm biased, you know that, but God, I'm going to speak for Joe here because I know and I've heard him, and I think he said it on the show with us before, but I believe that he feels that the 96 team, I think that was his most talented team, I think. You know what I mean? That again, I'm speaking on his behalf. I shouldn't be saying that, but I've heard him say that where, boy, oh boy, I understand Kadri, but you can't compare that to Forsberg, I think you can compare Mac and Joe, of course, MVP, best players in the leagues, whatever they are. But Forsberg, again, it was always about durability with Peter, but arguably one of the best players ever. I mean, to play the game. He plays 1,200 games. Who knows where this guy goes, right? But and then Yeller, I always go back, for years, been trying to replace him, like a guy that knows his role, that understands what protecting a lead is, that understands what being sharp and dependent and coach's dream when you think about it. And I mean, so down the middle, they were pretty friggin' solid. And then obviously, you got to add the first parts there. The 1.0, you had the Deadmarshes and, the Ricci's and Scott Young. Crow mentioned like Chris Simon, Corby. Keener was outstanding. Claude Lemieux, Valerie Kaminsky. I mean, holy schneискis. I mean, you're talking about a second line, right? Of basically, it was Claude Lemieux, Valerie Kaminsky, and Adam Deadmarsh. I mean, whoa. You know what I mean? That's pretty good. You know what I mean? Or, sorry, Forsberg, Deader was on the
Yeah,
first
yeah.
line, but sorry, my fault. Wow, you know what I mean. So you're talking about, and then Reach was on the third line with Keener and Yeller, and then who put all the leftovers on the fourth line, and then I was part of that after for the teams that didn't get it done. But we, boy oh boy, that what the names I just said there, it's kind of hard to, you know, give it. I'll give them the nod 1.0 as a whole, but 2022, yeah, Burakovsky was on the third line, absolutely, and that shows you how deep they were. But even if you go back on the 01 team, their fourth line was the big dish, right? Chris Dingman, which was a perfect fourth liner, with Dave Reed, that was so smart, and then Steven Reinprecht, that's not a fourth line
Yeah.
player, but just kind of went on, and part of the missing piece of the Rob Blake deal, right? That people tend to forget. Rhino was an outstanding, smart player that ended up playing forever, pro, not only in the NHL, but had a huge career in Europe. And Rhino was a big piece of that, you know what I mean? Because I think he understood where he was. So I'm going to give 2022 team, right there, the team, the nod. But I'm going to go era 1.0 because I always root for the 1.0 guys.
This is going to sound like a cop-out answer, but I don't think there really is one here because the
Fair.
22 era, you've got the cap constraints. So
yeah, it's harder for sure.
it's harder to have that consistency in your lineup where there was a fairly consistent lineup with the exception of, some parts that did get moved in and out. You don't have a Mike Keane, you replace him with a Sean Podine,
Yeah.
right? And now you've got, in your third line, you've got a Logan O'Connor who can easily move up to a second line in a pinch if you need him to. And then you've got an Arturi Lehkonen who can easily be on that top line, or you've got other guys that can step up if they need to. But the cap really just complicates a lot of things to say that this era can maybe make its case against the 1.0 era. And like you said, Eric, let's have this conversation in 2 more years and see if this group can replicate the 22 success in the future. And then we can have another sample size similar to that of the 96 to 01 time span and go from there. And then we might have a better idea of what we're dealing with.
I have a
And you're
couple.
right. No, hold on, Rudo. I'm going to add to it.
Yeah.
If you go back to that 01, right? Third line, left side. You just said it, Sean Podine. Good player. You know what I mean? Like limited. Like just a good grinder. Yeller that I don't need to keep talking about. And then yet now Eric Messier, that was now a forward with his 7-foot tall stick. You know what I mean? Like he never played forward in his life. Next thing you know, that's how good and that's how smart those guys were. They were the best clock killers as a line I've ever seen in my life around the NHL. You needed someone to go kill a minute. Those were the guys. You know what I mean? And I'm not downplaying it because their production, they scored some big goals, but they weren't expected to score goals because of the Sakic and Forsbergs and everything. But they would go and do their job and then chip in that big goal. But yeah, part of it is coaching. I think those guys did a great job. And then B, part of it is how smart those guys were, like the Podines yelling. Eric Messier, that's now a defenseman playing forward, and that was pretty amazing. That was a mismatch, made-up line that ended up being so successful for them. It was great.
A couple of bone to picks here. First, I have to give Avs 2.0 the nod here because Avs 1.0 let Eric Lacroix play in their depth for a while. So that's, can't vote for that. But on a serious note, I don't know that I agree that the 96 team was fully better. Maybe they had better depth. We're talking about third and fourth lines. But I look at this 01 team in the top 6. I look at a Milan Hajduk. I look at an Alex Tanguay. You talk about that amp line with Forsberg on it as their second line. You also had King Clutch and Chris Drury on that team. And you look at that top 6 around the superstars of Forsberg and Sakic, and you go, man, that was a really, really good hockey team. It's hard for me to argue against that top 6. So might give the nod to 01 there. And to be fair, the modern Avs have tried to do that. They've run into injury troubles with Landeskog. However you feel about the Nichushkin thing, not great. But even beyond those two, an Arturi Lehkonen in the Avs top 6. Now, as they kind of enter the second step as Avs 2.0, they have Casey Middlestat that has kind of solved that 2C problem for them. They have Jonathan Drouin currently, who has flourished in the top 6 here in Colorado. Really, both eras understood the assignment here, right? Where your top 6 forwards need to be some of the best of the best.
And I think there's a common denominator, and I said it earlier, it's Joe, right? Joe believes in power, believes in high-end players. I know that because I played with him. And, trust me, he loves the superstars. He loves the high-end players. That doesn't mean that, you discard all the bottom 6 guys. But I think it's important. I think he believes it because he lived it now with both. Firepower makes you win. You know what I mean? And it does. And he was firepower. He'd be the first guy that he would never, pat himself in the back. But Joe was the ultimate firepower, right, with Peter. So I think you look at the team, that's all it's built, right, through Mac and Mikko up front. So now you add, Kale back in, then you got some real power.
I love that you brought this up because this is the strongest argument for me that the Avs 1.0 were built better. And that's Sakic, Forsberg down the middle, 1-2. When you look at the 2.0 era of the Avs, their biggest hole in their lineup has been the 2C position. Now, they solved it for a couple of years with Kadri, and guess what? They won a cup when they did that. Hopefully this Middlestat thing is a similar story, but we haven't experienced that yet. What has really been a hole for the Avs for the majority of this era, it's that 2C spot, and the Avs 1.0 era essentially never experienced that. It's hard for me not to give the nod to 1.0 when you're talking about roster construction in that way. So, I don't know. Props to Pierre Lacroix for building a ridiculously good team on that one.
Yeah, and everybody around them. He'd be the first guy to tell you, yeah.
And again, not to beat this point into the ground a little bit more, but the 2.0 era is dealing with a cap. If there was no cap, you can probably say with a fair amount of certainty that Nazem Kadri is still wearing an Avalanche uniform today.
Very possible.
And we don't have this conversation about what Casey Middlestat is or could be. But the economics are what they are. So Kadri is gone, Middlestat's here, and we'll see how effective he can be in that second line center position.
All right, I'm done beating around the bush. Let's talk about the superstars.
Yikes.
As the conversation we've had already, you guys let's talk about this again in 2 years and see where things are at. What if we go back 2 years? If we go 2 years ago, Nathan MacKinnon is clearly behind Joe Sakic and Peter Forsberg. There is no doubt in my mind 2 years ago it wasn't that close. Today, we've got a conversation. 100-plus point seasons from MacKinnon. Obviously, this last year being a 140-point season, which sets the Colorado Avalanche record. I know he's not a captain. I think I'm going to have a hard time convincing anyone he's ahead of Joe Sakic on the list. But has he jumped Peter Forsberg?
I would say he has. I mean, you can look at both of their careers based on longevity alone. MacKinnon's right there.
Yeah.
He has the Hart Trophy. He should have 2 of them at this point.
Yep.
But it's really difficult to ignore what he has been showing since he had his coming out party a few seasons ago and has now become the face of the franchise. He may not have the captaincy, but he does wear that leadership letter. And he's really grown into that leadership role in the absence of Gabe Landeskog. People look to him. They are motivated by him, and his will to win is a lot like Patrick Waugh. He burns on the want to compete and the want to win. We heard it after they got bounced in the Vegas series. I've played for 8 years and haven't won bleep. And then next year they win. Hey, I finally won something.
Must be nice.
Yeah.
Eric, I know this is going to be a tough one for you.
Yeah, no, man. I have to put him, when I say him, Mac, in that category. I mean, he has proven it. This is not a one-year fluke. This is multiple years where he's dominant. Obviously, there was some injuries in a few years back, right? So he didn't play the whole 82 games and all that kind of stuff. So, and we're starting to see, and his playoff stats have been very good, right? We all know that. So I have to put him in the same category. Now, for me, it's like your first, your first love or whatever it is. Like I just freaking love Joe and Peter, and for me, I was just so lucky to be part of a few years with these guys and just notice it every day at practice, on the bench, on the ice with them, on the same shift. You got to remember, we had the luxury of being a fourth liner, and you know, Crow liked to play those guys. He told you the other day he liked to play them, and they, PK, and he liked to double shift them. So then you're on the fourth line. It's Corby and I, and you get the luxury of freaking having a Sakic or a Forsberg to go for a few shifts with you every game. That's how you score 18 goals, right? That's how you do it. You know what I mean? But it's that easy. I'm saying those guys were so good. They made everybody around them better, and then at the same time, so different. Those two were so different. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it was fascinating to see both of them, just the way they were on the ice, the way they thought the game, the way they prepared for the game. It was totally different. And it's hard for me to go against those two. And I put them on 1-1. I can't even say 1A, 1B, whatever. They're both number one. For me, that's I can't even do it. They're two, again, those two players in their prime were just amazing, and that's why I think MacKinnon's in the conversation. Absolutely won the MVP of the league last year, but that's where my bias for 1.0 goes. You know what I mean? I stick to the guys from back then, and I just have a hard time to let it go. And it's like a childhood hero or whatever. You know what I mean? So for me, it's like that's when I think of the Avs. I think of those two guys. I'm talking about up front. Of course, there's more guys, but like Patty and company. But we're talking up front. And for me, it's right away I think of 21 and 19, and it's hard for me to get away from.
A valid comment here in the Toyota chat from the Walrus, who says, I think the eras are similar on talent on forward/D, but the quality of competition is drastically different. Most recent Cup Avs have way more quality peers constructed on contenders, IMO. And I agree with that. Those 1.0 Avs eras, it was kind of always, all right, it's Colorado, Dallas, and Detroit out of the West. That's it. There was nobody else. So there is more competition in that regard, I think. But it doesn't change the fact that 1.0 had unbelievable talent. Mac is interesting, right? I think if you had to pick someone, I think he's more similar to Forsberg mechanically, just his ability to play with strength. There's a little bit of that power forward side to his game. Forsberg, definitely a better passer. There's no doubt about that. But as far as that's concerned, I know a lot more clutch and grab in Forsberg's era than in Mac's. But Mac is a guy who's absolutely willing to go through people. I wanted to throw a stat at you guys that I find very interesting, because to me, Mac's ahead of Forsberg now, and Forsberg's my favorite player of all time. He just is. Just had the best season in Avalanche history. You can't argue with it. Mac currently sits at 899 points in 791 games. Joe Sakic in an Avalanche jersey, so it does not include his Nordiques. I might be cheating a little bit there. But in an Avalanche jersey, 1,015 points in 870 games. If Nathan MacKinnon has a 116-point season this coming year, he will almost exactly be scoring at the same rate Joe Sakic did in an Avalanche jersey.
Numbers don't lie.
Yeah, I mean, those are great stats, and that's why I said, Mac has to be in that conversation, because of now the consistency, which he didn't have the first few years, where now he has achieved that. And you're right, Peter, it's the longevity, the durability wasn't there, right?
Yeah.
Where Joe, for the most part, besides a couple of things here and there, the freaky hand accident and I think it was the high ankle sprain there, that kept him out 1 year, and then was that the Olympic year, whatever it was, but it was kind of a nagging injury. But the consistency's been there, and that's what you're seeing that with Nathan MacKinnon. The consistency is now. I think Joe was Mr. Consistent. I think that should be his nickname, not Quoteless Joe or whatever it is. He was so freaking consistent. You knew what you were getting. And Crow said it the other day as a coach. It's like, wow, this is kind of nice to know that you can count on that every day. And I think the production just followed. So your numbers are perfect. I agree with your numbers, and that's why I agree. Nate is in that category. He just is. Numbers don't lie, like you said.
And we have 6 more years of this contract.
Bingo.
There's a lot more distance that he can separate between himself and Sakic and Forsberg. Not to mention individual trophies. This Hart Trophy could be the first of more down the line. There could be a Conn Smythe down the road if they get it done again. There could be Rocket Richards. There could be there's still untold potential here in what we're still seeing out of Nathan MacKinnon. And I get the unease of saying MacKinnon is better, because that implies that Forsberg wasn't as talented. And Forsberg, of course, as talented as, the weather outside is hot. So
It's too hot.
right. And we can point to Forsberg's international accolades as being something that stands on its own merit. He's been on a postage stamp.
Yeah.
Sure, MacKinnon's been on a breakfast cereal. Not quite the same thing, but still.
Yeah, but which one do you have in your house? Because I still have a box of Mac Flakes. I don't have a Peter Forsberg postage stamp.
Unfortunately, I do not have the stamp, but I too also have at least a box of the MacKinnon Crunch.
I'm saying.
Right? So this conversation isn't meant to, diminish Forsberg in any way, shape, or form. Not at all. But when this is all said and done, we can statistically make the argument that Nathan MacKinnon could be the greatest consistent point-producing, effective talent that the Avs have ever had in their history to date.
It again comes back to that 2-year conversation, right? Because we have the luxury of having experienced the entire careers of Joe Sakic and Peter Forsberg already. With Nathan MacKinnon, there's an argument that he has multiple years of his prime left. We may be about to see another record-breaking season from Nathan MacKinnon. I don't want to put that on him because 140 points is insane, but the expectations are that high for him that there's more of that in the bag over the next couple of years. And if we're talking about Nathan MacKinnon as a guy with 1,200 points in 1,000 games in a couple of years, that's a way different conversation than what we're talking about now. At that point, you're saying not only is Nathan MacKinnon the best Av ever, he's turning into one of the all-time greats, like Joe Sakic already is.
Right. We get more of that playoff performance out of him. Who knows where this will lead?
And what I like is you're starting to get some history now, right, with the Avalanche, which is nice. It's not like new. It's like you can compare 2 totally different eras, right? And again, we'll forget about those mediocre years in between, you know what I mean? But that's all part of the process. But it's fun to see what people think, and I think guys that are older like myself, I've seen both. It's kind of nice to, but I think nostalgia kicks in, and I think the answer is always more towards 1.0 because of that reason. And then if you ask a newer generation fan, like Tiff, for example, hi Tiff, I bet you that her answer was be more towards 2.0, right? You know what I mean? And the bottom line is you can't go wrong because we are so lucky to have all those players over the years here in Denver. I mean, it's amazing. You could be one of those franchises that there really hasn't been anything there the last 20, 25 years. So I think all in all, we're very lucky. And to get back to Forsberg for a second, I was watching that Olympic goal there, the stamp live. I remember watching it live, and I was like, what the hell was that? You know what I mean? Like, what was that? You know what I mean? And it's funny, and then, all of a sudden it's part of a stamp, right? You know what I mean? And it's just, I'll tell you, I've been there in Sweden with him. He's like the Beatles. I mean, it's insane. He is a god there. It's crazy.
I can only think of 2 players that have a shootout move named after them. Forsberg and Pavel Datsyuk. Although, I guess to be fair, we were calling that move last year the E-Rod that he was doing a couple of years ago.
Yeah,
but
true.
Maybe not as iconic as the other ones. We didn't really talk about it. Chat mentioned it a little bit. There is an argument that MacKinnon is not even the best hockey player on this team. you could absolutely give that nod in the moment to Cale Makar.
Without a doubt.
I don't really have a ton to say in this conversation just because Cale Makar is still so young. He doesn't have the numbers to really be in that all-time great conversation. But as I said earlier in the show, in my opinion, he's the best defenseman I've ever watched. Not forget in an Avs jersey, the best defenseman I've ever watched, period.
I'm going to add to it. And if we were having a contest, like you get to pick today one player to go win a game, you know what I mean? Like anywhere in the National Hockey League right now, my guy's Cale Makar. It's no offense to Nate or anybody else. Connor McDavid, my guy that I picked to build my team for that night is around Cale Makar. That's how much I think of him. That's how great. I mean, you're right. He's, again, we've said it, we'll say it again. He's going to end up being one of the greatest of all time. So that's not a big statement saying that. He is so young still, like you just said. So I think, again, we'll have an episode in 10 years about him and see where he stands. But it's going to be phenomenal.
Yep. All right. Any final thoughts on 1.0 versus 2.0, or are we good?
I think it's fair to classify both as impressive in their own rights. They have their own merits. They've won championships. They've been at the top of their class in the league, in their division, and they've been consistent. Yes, they've had their bloopers here and there, but every team has them. So it's great to look back at 1.0 and say, what a great introduction to hockey, reintroduction to hockey to the city of Denver and the state of Colorado. And to grow up in that time was meaningful. The 2.0 era, now you have a new generation of Avs fans that can look at this and say, this is awesome. I want to be on board for the ride here. And this ride is not over. We have plenty of twists and turns and peaks and valleys, hopefully more peaks than valleys to see here. And this collection of talent can just completely change the way that we look at this, not just this era, but Avs hockey in general, really. If we're going to be looking at this down the road 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, like it mentioned in chat.
Yep. It should be fun. We do have to wrap up today's show. Matthew, if you want to shout out your socials or wherever people can find you, go for it.
All right. So currently you can find me on Twitter, X, whatever it's being called now, at The Voice of Vlad. You can find my work on Burgundy Review. And it was great to be here and awesome time.
Yeah. It was a blast.
Looking forward to hopefully doing this again.
Yeah, we'll be back with you in a couple of days. It should be a fun show Tuesday. Also, we appreciate all y'all for hanging out with us. As usual, we're here 5 days a week, so like and subscribe on YouTube or find us on Spotify, however you listen to us. We appreciate y'all, and we will talk to you in the next one.
We all silly like the mayor.